The Fast and the Furious has transformed into a mega blockbuster franchise, but its origin all the way back in 2001 is a very different beast indeed. So join us as we watch the movie a quarter mile at a time. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
You can have any brew you like, as long as it's a Corona.
That's not aged well post-pandemic.
No, it has not.
It's not. So yes, welcome everyone. This is a movie podcast. We work through franchises and subgenres of movies. We do, seasons of movies. And this current episode is the start of a new season. It is the first part of the Fast and the Furious saga.
I'm pretty sure there was a movie called like The Saga and the Furious or something like that. Their naming scheme is ridiculous.
Yeah. So our plan here, because we didn't really have time to do all like 9 previous movies just before the 10th one comes out, but there's going to be an 11th one already confirmed, I think next year, maybe the year after, but certainly they've already confirmed that 9, 10, 11 is kind of like this finale trilogy. So we're going to do 1 through 5, right? Kind of in time roughly with number 10 coming out, and then we'll come back next year or whenever it is and do 6 through to the newest one when that hits. So that is the plan. This is going to be 1 through 5 of the Fast and the Furious movies. Plus, I don't know if I could have taken 10 straight weeks of the Fast and the Furious. It might have destroyed me, honestly.
You would wake up screaming in the middle of the night about family and how important it is.
Hey, it doesn't come up that much in this first movie because they hadn't established that yet. In fact, almost everything that this franchise is known for doesn't start becoming really established until I think the 5th one. So, other than the fact that there's cars and there's driving.
Well, I would hope so. That seems like a kind of necessary thing for Fast and Furious.
And there's some, obviously, actors who are going to be sticking around, although not immediately. Some of them like dip away for a few movies and then come back, and so on and so on. So my history with this franchise is that I saw the first one, I think, back when I first got a DVD player. I was given 2 DVDs with it. I was given American Pie 2 and The Fast and the Furious.
It's amazing that you became as snobby as you did about movies if that's what your entry into DVDs was.
It wasn't my entry into movies. It was just what happened to, the first movie I actually chose to get in DVD was Terminator 2, which I think is a bit more aligned with my personality.
That sounds it.
So it was kind of I didn't know what it was. It just I assumed it was purchased for me because it sounded like a movie that a young boy might like.
That's reasonable.
That was the logic. And I saw it a few times in my early teens and basically realized, in that period of my life when I was learning that things can be bad and there's things I just don't like, I didn't really like it that much. Yeah. And I only saw a little bit of the second one. I've never seen the third one. I've never seen the 4th one. I've never seen the 5th one. However, through weird hooker by crook logic, I did end up seeing the 6th one, the 7th one, and I think the 8th one, but not the 9th one.
I've seen none of them.
That's easy.
As far as I know. I mean, with all of the weird ass racing movies that were coming out at this point, I may have caught one of them on like TNT at like 10 p.m. at some point without even realizing it, but I have not actively been aware that I've caught any of these movies.
Hey, that's easy. It's much quicker to say. You've not seen any of them. I have seen the first one and then 6 through 8 for some reason. And needless to say, the franchise is very different. And I've not seen 5, but I understand 5 is where it becomes what it is after that. And it's a bit more outlandish. It's more of a blockbuster. It's more of this. Like I remember being gobsmacked when 7 broke all kinds of records and was like $1 billion movie, and I'm like, what? A sequel to that 2001 movie? Really? So we'll get into all the ins and outs. We'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do, and we'll get into some more of the general things here. Just our general feelings, our thoughts. Look at the director, the cast, all that kind of usual thing. I'll start off with the director actually, because I think he's not got a great career, right? He's got one movie that I kind of like, and that is a disaster movie from the mid-90s called Daylight, starring Sylvester Stallone. It's set in a tunnel and they get trapped, and I remember that being a relatively fun time. His career, like from this onwards, though, he also did Dragonheart, which I've never actually seen, but I've heard people like that. But his career after this is, he did Triple X also with Vin Diesel, and he went on to do a movie called Stealth, which I never saw, but it looked like Fast and the Furious, but with fighter planes.
Isn't that just
Top Gun?
What's it called? Top Gun, yeah.
One could argue that, yes.
Yeah.
Well, this movie's basically just does something else, but with cars instead of surfboards. So we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
He did the third Mummy movie, which no one liked.
I was gonna say that's what tanked the franchise. So
he did a movie in 2012 called Alex Cross, which I don't remember existing.
I remember that being based off of a book series, if I remember correctly.
Okay. The Boy Next Door I never heard of, and then the last thing he directed that came out was The Hurricane Heist, which I did hear of because it had an interesting title and premise. I never saw it though, so I don't know if he actually made another decent movie. But
I mean, based off of it, it just sounds like he was going through Roland Emmerich's trash, and it's like, oh, hey, that sounds like a cool idea.
Yeah, his next movie that apparently is in development is called Speed Hunters, and it's about racers. So he's really clinging to. I bet he's pissed. I bet he's pissed at the franchise. He didn't know it was going to be a franchise when he made this, but it turned into this like billion-dollar franchise, and it's like he's not been asked to come back and like do like the final movie or anything. He's just kind of left in the dust.
I mean, you say he's pissed, but I have to assume there's some sort of contract writer that he's been just basically able to coast off of. Yeah, as long as you keep on making fast movies, I keep getting paid.
I don't know. I really don't know if that's the case. Because
I mean, I guess it's fair. He's not a writer or anything like that. I'm so used to the directors being writers in today's movies where.
Yeah, no, he's just because the writer absolutely probably gets some royalties just because they keep using their characters.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I was curious because one of the things that obviously we're going to bring up here, right, is that it's the plot of Point Break, but swap surfboards for cars and swap bank heists for, hold on, let me check my notes, DVD players.
You say that, but the very first shot in this movie that shows off what it is, I looked because I was really wanting to know how outdated it was. I saw a bunch of TV VCR combos in there as well.
The height of, yeah.
So, I was going to say, and they were saying, oh, this is the big money load. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? It's the huh? Is it?
Yeah, even when DVD players were expensive, when it cost a few hundred to buy a DVD player, I still don't think that a truck of them would be the mother load. But, if you're in the heist game, I feel like there's more valuable things to heist.
Yeah. I wonder also, because half of stealing something is you have to be able to sell it again. I wonder who his market really is for this when they steal this stuff. Is there really just like an underground Best Buy where it's like, oh yeah, no, we'll take everything you got?
Must be, yeah, black market, I guess. It's just the way it works. So you got that, but because of that, because this is an obvious thing to bring up, that it's practically a remake of Point Break with just a couple of details changed and obviously different actors. I did stop and think, but wait a minute, there was a Fast and the Furious movie in the 50s. So is it possible that Point Break was actually copying that movie's plot if this is a remake of that movie? But, so I did some research and found out that this movie is not a remake, really, of that movie in the 50s. It's got the same title. Universal bought the rights to the name because they wanted to use the name. But the plot of that movie doesn't sound... there's a car in it, yeah, there's a bit of a chase, but it's not the plot of this movie.
Really, there's a car in the original Fast and Furious? Here, I thought it was a slow-paced crime drama.
It could be referring to personalities, and it could be runners. It could be people who run. It could be like a marathon movie.
What was that movie about the couriers that came out like a decade ago? I think it starred Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Oh, yeah, Premium Rush.
That was it. That one should have been Fast and the Furious.
That would have fit. That would have fit with that movie. So no, it's valid. It's valid to sort of. And don't get me wrong. Like lots of movies are effectively just copies with some details changed of previous movies. It's not unique to Fast and the Furious, but it's just it feels a bit more notable with this because it really is just swap out. You know, in the same way that you would say Under Siege is just swap a building for a boat and it's a Die Hard knockoff, you know?
Yeah.
If that became an entire subgenre. But
just Die Hard movies.
It's worth acknowledging, okay? It's very much the similar idea to Point Break.
Right.
But instead of Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, we have Paul Walker and Vin Diesel. And, you know, I'll say this up front, and maybe it's a bit unpopular to say now, for reasons, but Paul Walker was shit. He was always shit, and the fact that he's dead does not change the fact that he was always a shit actor.
I don't want to agree with you, but I will agree with you. And I don't think he was absolutely awful. I think there were moments in this performance in this movie that did shine through as like genuinely good acting, but I think it was whenever he was trying to play cool, that's where he was awful because he just didn't play it well, at least for me.
Yeah, he's got the charisma of a cardboard box. It's really quite.
There's a moment towards the end of this movie where he has to play panicked and like really concerned, and I think he did that well. But
okay.
at the very beginning of the movie where he's like, yeah, no, I'm just driving my car, super cool. I'm like, no.
I feel like
your name in this movie is Brian. Like,
I feel like he's trying to be cool though, like 80% of the movie. So
yeah, that is an issue.
You know, I think that's really. And to be honest, that's a problem with the movie in general. This movie so badly wants to feel cool. It wants to be cool. Everything about it is to be cool.
I'll hold off until we get to like more technical stuff, but I have major issues with this movie's soundtrack.
So do I. I have a few. It's kind of, you know, so you got Paul Walker who makes Vin Diesel, who's not a great actor by any means. Vin Diesel very much falls into that Arnold kind of mold where I like Arnold more, but in the same way that he's got a big structure, he's got a little bit of presence, but he's not a great actor, and he makes it work for him in certain roles. You know, when he plays Riddick, yeah, it kind of works. Yeah. You know, he plays a stoic kind of guy. He's not perfect for everything by any means, but he comes off in this looking quite good because Paul Walker is much worse.
Every single actor that, except maybe, I'm forgetting the actress's name, but Dominic's sister.
Oh, Jordana Brewster. Yeah.
Yes, that's right, Jordana Brewster. Every actor except possibly her comes off as better when they're playing across from Paul.
Yes.
Because he's just, everyone is so bombastic and way over the top. Even when we get to the cops in this movie playing opposite of Paul, they're still more energetic than he is.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, one of them's Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
You know, Ted Levine, he's in there. Michelle Rodriguez, I'd never thought of her as like a great actress by any means, but again, she has more personality in this than Paul Walker does.
I feel like though she is just playing the Michelle Rodriguez. Like,
yeah, but this is the first time she did it though, so this was the creation of what her. I mean, maybe this is just kind of what she's like, but
oh yeah,
but I think this
totally believe it.
This was like right at the start of her career. I don't know if she was in anything before this in a major role. So
got me.
Yeah. So
how old even was she?
But 20.
She was like 23.
23?
Yeah, 23.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, she was pretty much at the start of her career then. And to be fair, I think a lot of the actors in this are pretty much at the start of their career. They're all quite baby-faced.
Oh, yeah.
Especially since this franchise is still going 20 plus years later. And Vin Diesel, who is older than he's not older than the cops, but he's older than all the other main cast members. You know, he's like pushing 60 now. Whereas
he was 34 at the time of filming this, but the character of Dom is apparently supposed to be 24.
Yeah. To be fair, it never brings. I don't think it brings it up in the movie though. He feels like a big brother, and he feels like he's a decade older than his sister.
Yeah, but the other issue is we have the character of Vince, who I think does feel like at least mid to late 20s. But apparently they were both in the third grade together.
True, yeah, they did mention that, yeah.
So you never quite square that circle.
Yeah. Vince might be the worst character in the movie.
Yes, but I think it's only by virtue of they had to make him the biggest dick in order to make the story work.
Well, that's the problem. He's just this angry asshole all the time, and he's very one note. There's like nothing to him. Not that the other characters have a lot of nuance, but he especially just comes off as he's like aggressively one note, and it makes it worse.
I love the character of Jesse being his only thing is he's smart but has ADD.
That's his only thing, yeah. It's his whole.
But then add on to that the character of Leon, and I use the word character very loosely.
I had to look over and see who you meant because I thought you were talking about there.
Yeah, exactly. They have a crew of 5, and somehow they managed to give personalities to 4 of them, and then Leon's just there.
Well, here's the thing, right? So Paul Walker is technically outside the group for, he's kind of the new guy, right? And then the sister's kind of separate because she's the sister. So the actual group is Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, and then 3 guys who I don't think are in the sequels. So,
are they not?
And when you watch, and I think when you watch this movie, I think it feels like, these are the forgettable. These are all just like the rest of the bodies.
Here's the thing. I think if Michelle Rodriguez did not go on to a career outside of this movie, she would also feel that same way. It's only because we look at her and say, that's Michelle Rodriguez, that we expect her to be in the later things.
It's not like she's had a great career. She was in Resident Evil after this. She did. It's not like she's had like prestigious movies. I guess she just became enough of an. Do you know what it is? It's because she's the chick, right? And obviously you've got Brewster as well, but she's kind of the spunky tomboy, attractive, tough chick, right? She's got that kind of thing going for her, right? I think that makes her more popular than just the generic white guys that are also on the team that don't have characters. And therefore she's more memorable, and that maybe got her some more roles, which then was sort of like a look back. So they wanted her back when they decide, hey, we want to bring all the cast back to do the 4th one, because that's the one that actually brings all the cast back. So, and I say all the cast, I mean the 4 mains, which is Vin, Michelle, Paul, and Jordana. Maybe some of the others do show up a little bit. Like,
we're gonna get the FBI chief back, that major character.
Because there's definitely a few. Some of the small characters might end up showing back up again. I can't remember, but
so I guess the biggest thing for me in this movie is that it definitely plays like it wants to be an ensemble cast where it's just everybody's doing big things. But in the end, this movie can never seem to tear itself away from this is a love story between Brian and Dom, between Paul Walker and Vin Diesel.
Do you know what's so funny is I thought you were going to say between Brian and Mia, which is Dom's sister, who's Brian's actual love interest, and I was getting ready to jump in and say, no, you're wrong, it's the relationship between Dom and Brian, but that's what you said. You phrased it in a way that it sounded like you were going to say her instead. I was getting ready to pounce on you.
The movie was also like doing that up until maybe like 3/4 of the way through, and then they just forgot that was a thing.
Hey, this movie lives by a 1/4 of a mile at a time, okay?
How does that translate into movie time? Because apparently
15 minutes, 1/4 of an hour.
You say that. There's one race in this movie, the very first like real street race we see, where they specifically say this is a 1/4 mile, and they say that these cars can finish it in 10 seconds. This scene takes 2 minutes.
I did not notice them saying that. Yeah, that's they're going at like I mean, we'll talk about the effects later, but there's actually an effect in this scene that makes it look like they're warping like Star Trek, which makes it feel like they travel like 100 miles in the span of these 2 minutes. Yeah, and you're telling me this was only a 1/4 of a mile?
That's as far as he lives at a time.
Oh, so many thoughts. Anyway, before we get any further and talk about anything else, before we go any further,
okay,
I should just ask the question. Let's just get the general feeling out of the way.
Sure.
David, how did you find the first Fast and the Furious film?
This movie falls into a lot of action pitfalls for around the time, where it focuses more on these cool stunts and these cool set pieces more than it does the story. That being said, I can see why this movie was the bedrock of this franchise. I can see why they thought this had something more to it, because there is something interesting at the depth of this movie. And I think what it does come down to is the fact is it is just Point Break, and Point Break is a fine movie, but it's Point Break for car heads. And this movie went all in on car heads, which I guess was a lucky enough stroke that they have a bunch of disposable income and can spend money on watching this movie.
Yeah, I hate this movie.
That's fair.
I hated it pretty much as I sort of watched it a few times when I was younger, and coming back and watching it now, I suspect I think it'll be more entertaining to watch 5 onwards. I am not looking forward to these first 4. I don't actually know what 4's like. I never hear anyone talk about 4, but this movie, like, every time they use car terms to talk about something that isn't a car, I want to punch that character's faces in.
Oh yeah, no,
Like,
they there's a scene in this movie where they have to say grace and then they just say a bunch of car things.
Yes.
And at that point I'm like, it's too much.
Don't get me
guys.
wrong. Part of this is a taste thing. I'm not a car guy. I don't give a shit about cars, but the fetishization of the cars in this, the way the lives all revolve around them, the music video style, like camera shots and editing when the cars are being introduced. A lot of the dialogue sounds like sound bites of people just trying to say snappy, cool things rather than actual conversations. The soundtrack, which at some points will just like play 30 seconds of a song and move on to another song for no reason.
Okay, see, that's the part I disliked. Was at the scene of the very first street race, I kept track of it because it was so noticeable, where they were playing a different song every 15 seconds. And I thought I was losing my mind there, because the one that caught me off guard was it started with whatever song, and then it went into Limp Bizkit with the Rollin'.
Yeah, I know that one. I recognize that one too.
And then it transitioned to another song, and then 10 seconds later, another song. And mind you, this is before anybody's even said a word in this scene. They've just had 4 songs running.
Yeah, it's a montage, but for some reason they thought, oh, one song's not enough. We have to cycle through 4 songs in the one montage.
Yeah, it's someone wrote down in their film class, what is a montage? It is a bunch of images set to a song, but then they accidentally wrote it's a scene set to multiple songs. And it's like, oh, whoops, my bad.
Yeah,
Mix that up.
That was blowing my mind, because these are the details that I didn't remember. Going back and watching it again, I remembered the broad strokes of the plot and some of the more, big story beats, but I did not remember these little things. I did not remember the speed line weird. There's a point during the first race where it looks like the 2 cars are just surrounded by speed lines and there's no road, and it's just like this weird visual effect, and it looks, and it thinks it's so cool, and it's doing close-ups of, there's like a CGI bit inside the engine at one point as everything's firing and the camera's going through it, and I'm like,
right,
this is so obnoxious. It's so up its own ass as far as like caring about this shit.
See, I think the movie was trying to do a thing, or at least it should have been trying to do a thing, where even if you don't know car terms, you can at least follow the basics of what they do. Like when they're talking about the NOS, the nitrous oxide, they do a good job of saying, you push this, you go faster. I think it did a good job of explaining it. But then there are certain points where they do get a bit too thick on the lingo, and it's for things that don't actually matter. The scene that pops up in my mind is they use a floppy disk to show a inner working of this car and how they're going to modify it. And it's really a scene to develop the character of Jesse, but they just throw out all this lingo, and Paul Walker's just sitting there going, yeah.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that he's got like a 3D model of a car on this floppy disk that is in no way, shape, or form is this floppy big enough to house this type of 3D model. I'm just going to...
It could probably hold one 3D model, but he flips through like 7 of them before the scene's done.
Actually, that's one of the weird little like time capsule things of this movie, is it's from 2001, right? Mm-hmm. And I think once we're in the 2000s, we're kind of out of that weird 90s, the way they talk about the internet, but this has actually got a little bit of it still, where at one point, Dom's saying, hey, I had them look you up. They can find anything on the web. And it felt like, that feels a little dated even for 2001. This is kind of weird that they're still saying things like that.
Yeah, I was really hoping, every time we hit something around this era, I always hope that somebody references the internet in one of the ways of the interweb, or if they specifically say the World Wide Web.
the net.
I love those moments because I'm like, you think you're being hip, but in actuality, you're dating yourself more than you can imagine.
Well, honestly, so much of this movie feels like the way the characters are dressed, the music choices, and there's nothing wrong with having a music soundtrack that's from its time, you know, when a movie comes out. But it aggressively goes through too many. It's the same problem I have with a lot of Zack Snyder movies, where it feels like Zack Snyder just wants to show off his cool playlist. He's like, "Oh, I've got a playlist, and I'm going to play every song on it so you can hear it all." But this music is so aggressively 2001, and not even just from one genre. There's like 3 or 4 new metal songs. There's 5 or 6 rap songs. You know, it's going through a few different genres at the time. But
this movie, if you need to know specifically the time, this movie stars Ja Rule in a very small cameo, and then the ending theme is by Ja Rule.
I'd like to say I know who that is other than this franchise, but
yeah, he's a rapper.
Oh yeah, but I figured
Early
that
2000s.
part. Yeah,
that's all you really got to know.
Yeah. So he was in some scary movies apparently. Okay.
One character I did want to bring up. Noel Guglielmi.
That's the actor.
Yes, that is the actor. He plays Hector.
He plays Hector. Yes,
He plays Hector. Apparently, and I don't know how accurate this is, but it's enough that I knew the trivia fact. This is the first time he plays a character named Hector. He goes on to play Hector in completely unrelated franchises and shows and stuff like that 9 more times.
Yeah, I think he's in at least something else I've seen called Hector, because it kind of rang a bell when he said it.
Yeah. He just plays Hector in a bunch of different things. For some reason, he's just... I mean, if you've seen the actor, you know he is typecast as just the Hispanic actor. Like the tough guy looking one. But he's played Hector at least 9 times besides this movie.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's in at least one more Fast and the Furious movie, looking at this list.
Oh boy.
So look forward to that.
Can't wait.
The Return of Hector. There's something about this movie, the way it does these extreme close-ups and like it does these sort of track ends on people's faces. It'll do like sped up shots and slow down in the same shot of like a car stopping and parking. You know, there's a scene early on where Paul's talking to Mia because she runs, and this is one of these little details that's kind of just glossed over in the movie, but it seems like Dom owns like a little garage / like diner.
Yeah. For some reason there's a diner, but I have no idea how the garage comes in on that.
Yeah, but he's there talking to her, and it's like introducing the rest of the team, right? So it's teasing Dom, who's like in the back behind he's in shadows, and the introduction of the rest of the team is they all come round in their little souped up cars with their lights underneath, and the lights under the cars feel really lame to me. This is exactly the same thing as someone who's obsessed with like RGB on their computer. Like I also think that's a little bit lame when you sort of deck it out. It's like, oh yeah, it's just lights.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, the one tiny little niche in terms of hobbies that I could just never understand were the sneakerheads. Like people who are really into sneakers. I don't get it. I don't think I ever will get it. But with cars, I can at least understand, you know, there is this sort of, I don't want to say primal, but just this like deep down thing of the loud noises and the ability to go really fast. There's something to it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm never going to be part of that, but I can at least understand it.
Yeah, I don't mind like a movie about characters who care about cars. Like that's not my problem here. My problem is just so much that it focuses on that. It's almost like it's you know, rather than having engaging characters where that's their thing, this thing's meant to be what the entire movie's kind of like built on, and like that's the thing that's supposed to carry it through. And like no, that should be that should just be like flavor on top of what the characters are. And I don't think it really does that. I think it is so excessively focusing on. It really does feel like a music video sometimes with the way it shoots the cars and.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more okay with the idea of, all right, you've got all these cool cars, and they do have a lot of cars in this movie, more so than even just the main cast use. But you've got all these cool cars. You want to show them off. I can respect that they only really kept those shots to the racing moments, to like the big action set pieces. It wasn't like the whole movie was shot in the way that you're describing. Whenever it's two characters talking, it's just two characters talking. It's shot pretty much as standard as could be imaginable.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of scenes with. Because it's the races, it's the introduction to the races. You know, when they're at was it Race Wars was the thing later on in the movie
in the desert, yeah.
Or it's the street racing early on, or it's the introduction to the team, so they all have to have these intros in their cars. Like, there's just this feeling like it's like, hey, aren't these characters cool? And honestly, I'm sitting going, nah, I think they're kind of lame, honestly.
I do wonder if it was because, like we said, this movie is dated as hell.
Yeah, it was super dated. Yeah,
I do wonder how cool they would come across if this movie was just one for one made with today's coolness in mind. Because obviously, if someone's trying to be cool, but they are actually 20 years too far out of date, obviously they're going to seem uncool. I just wonder if back in the day, whether or not this would have worked.
No, see, here's my argument against that. My argument against that is that I can watch movies from the 70s, movies from the 80s, movies from the 90s, whatever it is, and there's definitely characters in those movies that are cool. And they're cool in a timeless fashion. The reason why this doesn't work, and the reason why I don't think it even worked for me at the time, is because this coolness is all about what's trendy, right? It's all based on these superficial things that make you cool. And that doesn't make you cool, and that's why it doesn't work now, especially now when these trends are all gone. But even at the time, you can kind of see through it. Whereas you go back and, you know, like Dirty Harry, right? We started this show with Dirty Harry as the franchise. He is cool in those movies. He's suave, and it's timeless, and it doesn't, you know, like some of his sexism and stuff dates a bit. But the way he carries himself, the way he, like, walks into a scene, and the way, like, you know, it doesn't have to do something super fancy to make him cool with the camera. You know, he just walks in and just is imposing in the frame, and it works. You know,
I agree, and I definitely agree in terms of Paul Walker's performance. Because, like I said from the very beginning, he's not cool.
Are we really comparing Paul Walker to Clint Eastwood?
Well, no, but I am going to bring up Vin Diesel because I do think Vin Diesel does have this sort of presence. And yes, it does rely a little bit on camera tricks because I think it's a pretty well-known fact Vin Diesel is not the tallest man alive.
Oh, sure.
He's not exactly. So there's some level of camera trickery just to get him up on everyone's level. But
well, yeah, but
he's still got this feeling to him in all the scenes where he does feel.
Yeah, but you know,
like he has a presence.
Do you know who else isn't that tall in real life? Arnold Schwarzenegger is not that tall in real life. There's a difference between trickery, which is unnoticed by the viewer, that to make him feel like a bigger presence, and aggressive camera movements and cuts to try and feel hip, right?
Fair.
There's a very big difference between those two things, and this movie is very much the latter.
I guess I don't feel that the camera trickery was to make the characters feel cooler. I think it was to make the cars feel cooler. I think the characters live or die by their own writing. I think that it was strictly like
definitely die.
Yeah. But I think that the all of those scenes, because again, they mostly keep them to the racing scenes. I think it was more so of like, yeah, if we shot this realistically, it would be done in 10 seconds. They would put down their foot on the gas. They would race. 10 seconds later, the scene is done, and everyone's like, wow, what a rush. And we're sitting there in the audience like, I guess.
By the way, just a little bit of foreshadowing for, I think it's the sixth or seventh movie. This is not the last time this franchise will engage in, that was a very long road, syndrome. Yeah. So
I'm sure
we'll get back to that. People know what I'm talking about. The longest runway in the history of airports is coming up in
oh, okay. I gotcha.
Number 7 or whatever it is. Yeah, and I want to make something clear here. Like, I'm critiquing the way this movie handles the car fetish, and people are saying, yeah, but you just said you don't like cars. Maybe this works for people who do like cars. So let me just hypothesize for a second. Okay. This was something I did care about. Let's pick something else. Let's pick, I don't know, like... I
mean, I guess the easiest option would be Point Break. How do you feel about surfing, comparatively?
I don't care about surfing either.
Do you think, though, that they made surfing seem cool in Point Break?
I don't think Point Break's great. I think it's better than this. But I think the surfing in Point Break, I always kind of felt like, oh, to them it's spiritual, and they go out and they sort of describe why they like doing it. I think the weird thing about this versus the surfing is that it's a lot more technical. So I think I'll go back to the computer comparison, right? Because I like computers well enough, right? And I've built my own computer, and I like having nice parts on my computer. So that's probably the closest thing I can compare to like a car person, because they like the engines and getting all the bits and pieces in it and whatnot.
You could list off the full graphics card name and your processor and all that.
I have a Ryzen 7 3700X processor. Yes, I've got a RTX 3060 Ti.
Yeah, see, I can immediately hear some of our audience being like, what are you talking about, you nerd?
Absolutely, and that's fine. If the movie was about people who built PCs, which admittedly would be a very different movie,
I would kill to see that movie. Are you kidding me?
I would still critique these same things, though. Like, if someone like said, oh, you've got this in your computer, and they did like a sort of like, camera tracks into their face, and like there's like a Dutch angle as they go, holy shit, they've got 64 gigabytes of RAM, I would still think it was lame.
Hackers. That's the movie you're talking about, and you're right, it is lame.
So this critique, even though in this case I don't actually care about the subject that it's fetishizing, I still think the problem is that it's just fetishizing the subject without actually backing it up with a good story, with good characters, and honestly some of the direction is just kind of lame. Rob Cohen, I think, looking at his career, I just don't think he's a good director, and I think that's evident in a lot of this movie.
That's fair. I think that this movie, I'm going to disagree on the fact that it doesn't have like any story to it. I think that the core story, the core mystery of it is Paul Walker's character needs to find out who's responsible for the stolen goods. And if you focus solely on that, there is an interesting like mystery where it goes down a few false leads until finally it gets to the big climactic finish. The issue being is that this movie forgot that was the core story, and it focused on this bromance so much more.
Well, to be fair, I didn't say there was no story. I said a good story. Right?
That's fair.
I want to specify that. I'm not saying this is lacking. This clearly has a plot. There is definitely story there. In fact, it even tacks on extra things that feel kind of shoehorned in, to be honest. And I don't think the bromance is, because the core story of this movie is definitely the idea that he's the undercover cop who's befriending this group, but he starts to kind of respect them and actually care about them, and that is the conflict of interest, which is supposed to be the linchpin. It's meant to be the thing that we care about and latch onto for the drama. And ultimately, that's why the bromance is important, because it is the natural sort of inclusion of that. But there's lots of other little things that come off really lame, that feel undercooked. There's definitely like there's a whole thing with Jesse that's introduced like all of a sudden, like in the last third of the movie, that ends up being really important for a lot of big things that happen, and it feels just so out of nowhere. It was not set up properly at all.
It ends up being really important, but only because they forced it to be important.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
Like, it didn't feel naturally important at all.
Like, they have there's a big scene right at the end that only happens because of that setup with Jesse, but the setup with Jesse is so just
without getting into spoilers, I think the best way to say it is just imagine that a character halfway through the second act says, "Hey, I'll be back later." He leaves. We don't see him for an entire act, and then all of a sudden he comes back and is like, "Hey, by the way, I brought the climax with me."
Oh, it's not even just that though. It's what before he leaves, he also just all of a sudden he's got this thing that is a problem, and like just all of a sudden there's this like did he ever mention his father before this scene? I don't think he did.
Nope. I do wonder how much of this is one of those movies where I think there is probably a lot on the cutting room floor to keep it at a manageable time, because it is an hour 45 for a mid-2000s car flick. Like, that seems long already. So I wonder how much of it was actually cut for pacing and time and just keeping it manageable.
If 2001's mid-2000s, what the hell is early 2000s to you?
Specifically January 1st to the 2nd.
Okay.
That was it.
Just clearly established.
Honestly, if I said mid, that's my bad.
Yeah.
But
you definitely said mid.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah. Is there anything else we want to say before we just start? going through
The
it.
only thing I think is worth mentioning here is that the entire movie, the entire precept, is based off of a magazine article called Racer X, which I guess was just written about illegal street racing. And they thought, hey, let's make that a movie.
Yeah, I wonder if the illegal street racing scenes actually got as much of like a crowd as the street racing in this does, because it feels like it'd be hard to hide if you've got that many, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine there being at least, 10 to a dozen people, but this is the one street that they just take over has at least 4 dozen people there, and that seems excessive, especially for illegal street racing.
Yes. Especially since there's like an angry driver, it's like a delivery pizza guy. But it's the director, I think. It's the director of the movie who's like, goddamn street racers always blocking traffic. I'm like, how much of an epidemic is this in the city that there's just constant? Everyone's just used to streets being, cordoned off by street racers.
I mean, I've been driving down the occasional road and I've seen, what's obviously two cars racing each other. Like I see them going by super quick, like matching each other. But I've never had this perfectly laid out parallel parking of all of these cars going up and down the street, blocking any entry roads. It seems far more responsible than I think actual illegal street racing is.
I'm not saying this is safe, but it's definitely less dangerous than actual street racing probably is.
Absolutely. Although I do, as I was watching this movie, I don't know what was going on, but every once in a while I'd hear outside my window like one of those super loud engine cars. And I was like, is it happening? Is the Fast and the Furious here? Turns out no, it's just a dick.
Yeah. Or you maybe just forgot you had surround sound, I don't know.
If I did, I have not been taking advantage of it.
Yeah, alright, so spoilers then for the movie, we'll get into it and talk about it. This is a movie about stealing DVD players from trucks. And the movie opens with, 3 black cars, identical black cars, taking over this truck using like a... It's like a... What you call it?
It's a grappling hook.
A grappling hook, yeah. They fire and one guy goes into the thing. And I want to point out here that in this scene, all of the people involved in this heist of this truck are all dressed head to toe in black. They're all wearing like motorcycle-style helmets to hide their faces. For some reason, when we get to the third act and they're doing the big job at the end of the movie, they completely drop their MO entirely and all just go in their regular clothes with no mask. There's like one guy wearing a helmet in the last heist.
Yeah, I get why they did it from a storytelling and trying to keep the mystery alive, but yeah, it's all of a sudden them just dropping. And also, this one takes place at night. Apparently, they all take place at night, except for the last one.
Yeah, broad
which
daylight.
Obviously was done for the purpose of the movie so that you could see all the impressive stunt work, but it's weird there was never any sort of reason given as to why they were like, hey, this time we're just gonna screw all that. Maybe Jesse was the one in charge of getting their outfits. Maybe that's what
it was, yeah. So he wasn't around to help.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, my problem is less that they're doing it here. It's more that they just drop it later. So they should be also in their outfits later, but whatever.
Yeah.
So we're introduced to we're introduced to Brian, I should say.
No, we're introduced to Paul.
Brian's testing. He's driving around the big parking lot, trying to get good at driving his little green muscle car or whatever, or race car or whatever it is. I don't know cars, okay?
Yeah, I was writing muscle car at the beginning here because I kept on thinking, hey, maybe we'll see a normal car at some point. But the answer to that is no. They're all muscle cars.
Well, he drives a truck for work in between. Not real work, obviously. He's undercover, but he's technically working at a mechanics or... No, it's like a parts dealer.
It's an auto part shop.
Yeah. But we're introduced to him, and he goes for a tuna sandwich at this little bar, but he's clearly been coming here to try and get to know the group, right? So he's the whole point, and he's been flirting with his sister, Mia, and they have a bit of back and forth, and we get this over-the-top introduction to the rest of the group, all coming round the corner in their cars.
Coming around their Power Rangers colored cars.
They're all color-coded.
Everyone's got their primary colors.
Yeah, they're all skidding. They're all making, like, burning rubber. There's all these things happening. It's all these shots of all the tires stopping, and just that shot of the corner of the cars, they stop, and then like they all get out and the camera goes up their bodies as if like they're big deals and all the rest of it, right? Which any one of these things on its own is fine, but there's just these little things that make it feel really fake to me, like. Brian like hears it before they come around the corner and turns around like oh, something big's about to happen, but in reality it's just a bunch of cars coming around and parking. It's not it's not some big special show.
No, he can hear how much horsepower they have.
There's just so many little things like that are kind of cheesy but not in an endearing way to me. They're just very
okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, so for some reason, well, it's not some reason, like, they do kind of establish as the movie goes on that Vincent clearly has feelings for Mia, and maybe this is a jealousy thing, but he just immediately starts acting like no one in real life would ever act to another human being.
I mean, if just looking at him, I have him up on my screen right now with a cast photo, just looking at him. If there is a kind of guy who's really into muscle cars and wears a mesh top 95% of his life, I think he would be this ill-adjusted to normal human conversation.
Yeah,
I'm saying it's not out of the realm of possibility this person could exist.
Okay, but I mean, he just immediately starts staring at Brian. When Brian just pays for his food and leaves because he's like, well, I don't want a confrontation, I'll just go. He goes up and says, okay, you're not coming back here anymore. You can go somewhere else. And picks a fight with him. And eventually Dom goes out to break it up, which is how they all kind of meet properly. But, like, every single thing is just so aggressive and just without, like, could we not have, like, just so... Like, could Brian say one little cheeky thing to set him off, just to give us a little bit of a, okay, he kind of poked the bear a little bit?
I mean, I guess it wasn't cheeky, but basically he told him, like, nah, I'm going to keep coming here for my tuna sandwich. He was telling him, no, screw you.
I don't think that counts, though, because that's in retaliation to him already saying something completely unreasonable.
I mean, the thing that was setting him off is the fact that he's been here multiple times and he's been chatting up his crush.
Yeah, like every day. Yeah, he's like, wait, he's got some sort of sandwich fetish or something. He says, I think.
Yeah, like that's the thing that's setting him off already. He's like, "You moving in on my girl? How dare you?"
But it's definitely not his girl, as is repeated throughout the movie.
Yeah. Okay. I can, but like that's the thing. I don't think his characterization is that far out of what I could see as being just this horribly testosterone-filled guy who's like possessive of a girl that's not actually into him and all that stuff. I can see this guy existing. He's not a fun guy to hang out with, but he exists.
But he's not fun to watch either.
Oh, no.
Well, that's what I'm getting at here, is this is all just kind of unpleasant. There's nothing... And, like, Brian's not charismatic enough that it feels like, oh, like we're kind of rooting for him in this scene. It's like, no, it's the bland guy with no charisma versus the asshole who's just needlessly aggressive for no reason.
But one of them has those piercing blue eyes. And doesn't that just make you want to root for him anyway?
You know, typically if you're doing an action movie and you have our hero that we're going to be supposedly rooting for, and you have some asshole who's just over the top asshole, the fun of it is that, you know, our hero is going to put them in their place. He'll say something genuinely witty that'll make the asshole feel belittled, which might, you know, escalate the situation, which then will show how the good guy is then capable in a fight. This scene doesn't do any of those things. It's just him being an asshole. He picks a fight, they start throwing punches, and then Dom has to break them up. We come out of this scene not feeling like, oh, Brian's proven himself in any way, shape, or form, other than just, you know, not letting himself, you know, to get told to F off, basically. Yeah. And Vincent never gets any real comeuppance. There's no, you know, and that's kind of the thing throughout the movie with Vincent, I think especially, is that he keeps being a dick repeatedly in multiple ways, and he gets injured towards the end, I suppose, in the final set piece, but I don't know if that ever really feels like he is learning a lesson to not be a toxic dick.
Yeah, and I mean, this goes into a larger point I wanted to make about the movie as a whole, is that every character in this movie is given like the beginning of an arc and possibly even the middle of one in some cases, but by the time we hit the climax of this movie, none of them matter. All of them are immediately, and when I say climax, there's the set piece and then what I consider to be the actual climax.
Yeah, but the actual climax is just Dom and Brian.
It's just Dom and Brian. And because of that, everyone else's stories are just kind of pushed off to the side and nobody gets any sort of real closure to any of their stuff. We don't find out if Vince is like, oh, hey, you saved my life. You're actually a cool dude. We don't find out how Mia feels about, I don't want to say Paul, but Brian
yeah.
After everything that's said and done. We get little hints to these things, but we're not given any sort of actual closure on anyone except for Paul and Vin Diesel. That's it.
And I mean, maybe there was the hope they'd get a sequel, but given the fact that Vin Diesel's not back in the sequel, you know, the first one, that is, you know, Too Fast, Too Furious. We'll talk about the titles as we go through them. But given the fact that Mia's not back, I think, in this, maybe she is, I don't know. I actually genuinely don't
regardless
know.
of who comes back, your movie still has to stand on its own.
Oh, for sure. I'm just trying to think, even if there was a logic at the time where, like, oh, we're hoping we're going to, like, pick up these threads next time, the fact that, well, I don't know, was that the plan? Even if it was the plan, like, clearly that didn't pan out because none of them, most of them didn't come back until the fourth movie. So, you know, it kind of does feel like just, a bunch of plot threads that are just kind of like, or not even plot threads, just character threads are just left dangling.
But that's what makes it feel like I'm invested. I wouldn't say invested. I'm interested in these characters going up to this climax because during the set piece, they're all there. All the characters get their time in this set piece. They get their time to develop who they are, what they're doing, except for Jesse. But as soon as the set piece ends, it's just gone. All of them are gone. And it really, I felt, takes the wind out of the sails of this movie for the last 15 minutes. Because once you're done with the final set piece and all the characters go by the wayside, if you're not into the Brian v. Dom thing, it's just an uninteresting ending to the movie.
Will it shock you to learn that I was never interested in the Brian v. Dom thing?
What? No.
Nor was I ever interested in the Brian and Mia love story, if we can call it that. Nor was I ever interested in Brian versus Vincent. I mean,
there was a point, I think it was like 20 minutes into this movie, where Dom kisses Letty, and I'm like, they have shared so much screen time together already, and this is the first time I'm actually picking up that they're dating each other.
No, there's a moment just before the first race where he's talking to two blondes and she comes up and she's like, I smell skanks. Beat it.
Oh, yeah.
So there is like a jealousy moment and he's like, I was just talking to them.
Fair enough. I guess I didn't register that as them actually dating rather than her just being jealous of him.
Oh, sure. Yeah, maybe they weren't. Yeah. But she also takes him upstairs for a massage.
That's the point where I realized. The point where I'm like, okay.
Oh, was that the scene where they kissed for the first time? Okay, yeah.
It may not have been a kiss, but they were, more intimate than they ever were before that.
Okay, yeah. I think the problem with the premise of the movie, this undercover cop befriends the bad group who might not actually be completely bad guys, right? That's the
and mind you,
that's the premise of the movie, right?
Yeah.
I think the problem with that is that if the characters themselves are not, if the whole thing is meant to be this like this uneasiness of like, oh god, they're going to find out he's a cop, but he really likes them now, so I want to care about them, him winning their trust and him winning their respect, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the problem is that if you don't care about if the characters themselves are not engaging, then that like impending like we're going to have to deal with this later is not exciting. In fact, it's actually the opposite. It's like, oh, we have to go through like all these drama beats with these characters. If you're not interested in the characters before that point, it's not an exciting thing. It's not a tense thing that you're invested in. It's just this ticking down of something else you don't want. Which is, I think even when I was younger watching this movie, I think that's how I always felt watching this, is I just did not give a shit about them finding out that he was a cop.
That's fair. I personally found it a bit more interesting. I think that this movie did a good job of surprising the audience as well, because they give absolutely no hints up until he's brought in by the police that he is an undercover cop.
Yeah, almost to the detriment, because when you know it's coming, there's a moment where he's getting pulled over where he looks worried in the car, where I'm like, why is he looking worried? Like, he knows this is all fake.
I mean, he could be worried because, like one cop says soon afterwards, you never know who's watching. He could be like, oh, you're brought in by the cops. What's going on?
Okay, it's a bit of a stretch, but...
Oh, yeah. This whole movie is a bit of a stretch. I'm not saying...
Yeah. Okay.
I think what it comes down to is, for this particular movie, is that I've already accepted the fact that by the time we hit these last movies, they're just stupid fun. Like, I'm going into it just expecting to turn your brain off and watch the cars go wee. But I'm already there with this first movie where it's kind of taking itself seriously still, but I'm just accepting all of the weirdness and the stupidity of it as they're just watching the cars go wee.
I think that's my problem. The main problem I have with this is that the taking itself seriously is really painful to sit through when you can't take it seriously, and I can't, because it's insanely stupid at points with the way it treats its subject and the way it shoots its subject, and because of that, I can't get into any of it at all. You know, like, I'm definitely going to be more looser on 5 onwards, just because at that point it's a big stupid blockbuster with like silly over the top thing. But it's you know, when we get to those movies and you see some of the shit that they're being tasked to do, we want you guys to pull off this heist, you're going to be laughing when you remember back to the first one and go, they were just stealing DVD players off of a truck.
Right.
Like, this is going to seem quaint compared to the shit they're doing. Like, people were legitimately saying, they have to do like one in space, because that's how silly it's going to get.
I'm sure.
And nothing in this first movie feels like it's heading there. You know, nothing, you know, even the family stuff in this is like, the only time it really comes up is when Ted Levine, who's like the sergeant who's sort of in charge of Brian, halfway through the movie, he's kind of like, hey, you know, he basically references Dances with Wolves, because he says, hey, you go native on me, because he thinks, maybe you're becoming bonded with the group. And he says, you know, there's different kind of families, Brian. You're going to have to choose which one you want. And it's funny because, like, everyone associates the family thing with Vin Diesel because he's the one who's always saying it. And in the later movies, he's always talking about his family.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But it was interesting to me that that's where it actually first comes up in this original movie, is sort of like, which family do you want to be a part of, Brian?
I will say there's a scene in this movie, I guess it'd be about halfway through, where they have just a cookout.
Yes.
For discernibly no reason, except to further this idea that, like, Vince stormed off, he was super angry about something, and then basically he comes back and he's just welcomed back in immediately. Like, they give him a little bit of crap, but then it's like, nah, you're a part of the group. You're with
and
us,
they definitely like call back to this a lot in the later movies, where one of the things that does come back from this is that there's a lot of, like, you know, at the end, after everything's over, there might be a scene of them at a barbecue at the house. Like, because that's what they do, because they're family.
Family.
They do barbecue together. They drink Corona.
Up until probably this next movie coming out, in which case they're going to switch to a different drink.
Maybe they'll put in a joke. Maybe they'll have, like, maybe there's a joke at Corona, and maybe like Vin Diesel will be like, maybe not anymore.
I feel like Corona probably would have paid the big bucks to keep that brand in the movie, though. They'd be like, please,
true.
We need it.
I meant to, yeah, Corona, the beer company, might have a problem with that, with that joke.
Yeah.
They're probably having a bad couple of years as it is because of the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. Guaranteed. All right, so we were left at the point where Dom breaks up the fight, and he basically asks who Brian is, gets his ID and all that, and then says, oh yeah, you work for Harry down at the auto parts? You're fired.
Yeah, but what he
As
doesn't
if he has
know...
that level of pull.
Yes, but what he doesn't know is that Harry has been forced by the police to keep Brian on as an undercover cop. So he can't just fire him, you know, because otherwise he'll go to jail for illegal items or something, they said.
Yeah, he was selling, like, stolen whatever.
So, okay, all right, that establishes that.
And then at that point, Brian turns around and he's like, I need nitrous oxide. Give me everything you've got.
Did you notice when he said, I need NOS, there's like 5 posters for NOS in the background?
Did you notice how every time I blinked, there was NOS in the image? Everyone had stickers on their cars and posters in the background and buttons on their steering wheels. NOS is basically just the sole founder of this movie.
Yeah. Honda definitely sponsored it a little bit. There was a lot of Honda talk.
Oh yeah, I do wonder whenever there's movies where cars are the focus, how they manage to get the branding of like, oh, okay, Honda wants to be featured, but so does Toyota, and so does. How do they decide which cars get to go where?
Well, it's yeah. Well, I think it's also partly how they end up with just having access to a lot of cars in the movies. Is like, okay, we want product placement, and part of the payment is we'll let you borrow some cars to shoot them in the movie with. You know, it's how they get super expensive Lamborghinis and shit in movies. It's like, hey, are we going to actually spend the money to rent this? No, we'll get it for free, and they get some product placement out of it.
I guess my one question would be: there's a scene later on in this movie, completely out of nowhere, seemingly like shot for the trailer, more or less, where they pull up to a red light next to a Ferrari, and the Ferrari owner's like, "You can't keep up with this," and then they just immediately blast past him and smoke him. How'd they get Ferrari's permission to be like, "No, your cars are slow. Screw you."
Well, I think part of the thing I want to bring up about this movie that feels really dumb to me, comparing to every other racing movie that ever, because I like other racing movies. Ford v Ferrari was solid a couple years ago. Days of Thunder is a pretty solid movie. These things can work.
Yeah.
The thing that stuck out to me in this movie, though, compared to those, as far as the actual racing goes, and it's kind of brought up at a certain point as well, is that every race, as far as we can see, is just a straight line. At which point I'm like, how much of this is really the skill of the driver versus just how much money they've put into like souping the car up with shit? And at a certain point, one of the characters even says, it's just been before Jesse races later on in the movie, is like, hey, that guy you're racing is rich. Like, he's probably put $100,000 into the engine in this thing, so he's probably just going to win because he's got more money than you. And that's kind of what happens. And I was already thinking that earlier on when like every race was just a straight line. I'm like, part of the thrill of the race in any other type of racing movie is that the driver has to use corners, has to use all these like what the track is to try and like get an advantage to like, and it's like, okay, so it becomes like this almost strategical game as well as just being able to handle the car at the intense speeds.
Right.
Because
so for the counterpoint on that, I think that the strategy and all that comes down to
when to press the button that makes you go faster.
Well, the strategy is that, but this is more of skill in not how you handle turns and stuff like that, but the shifting of gears is the main thing. In that you constantly see them talking about how they handle the clutch and stuff like that. That's where it comes into, because if you don't shift gears at the proper time, you don't gain that little, like, you lose fractions of a millisecond, but still milliseconds of speed to someone who is shifting gears at the proper time. Mind you, that's all kind of thrown out the window as soon as you introduce the magic button that makes you go super speed, but...
would you say, though, that they capture in this movie, in a cinematic way, the drama of those decision-making moments? Of, like, when to shift gears?
Only in the very, very final scene climax. Where... I mean, we'll get to it, but they're basically outrunning a train, and they're specifically showing Vin Diesel moving the clutch around and just being like, nope, I'm going for it. That's the only time I think they actually managed to give it any sort of reference of this is why it's important.
But what I'm getting at, though, is that in other movies where it's about taking the corners and overtaking the opponents and things like that, you can build moments out of that with cinematic tension. You can have them try and pull off a move, and if they succeed, then great, that's a big moment. If they fail, then okay, that's a bad moment. But there's like a win and a loss outcome to a simple little moment that either might damn them or maybe is like, okay, we have to make that up later. There's things that I can understand, even though I don't know that much about cars, and how to actually like build the drama of the race and all these little mini like successes and failures throughout. I think when it's down to this minutia of you might get a fraction of a speed boost versus someone else because you've changed gears slightly better, I don't know if that actually lends to drama in a scene.
Yes and no, because I also would like to point out that at no point is the center point of the drama in this movie on the result of the race itself. It's all about what happens outside the race. It's about how the people interact and how, like, Paul Walker in the very first race he does loses his car. It's no longer his. He gives it up. And nobody cares that he lost that car. because the result of the race didn't matter. It was all about how they were interacting with each other and how they were getting to know each other. That's why not the final scene, but the set piece of this movie is not a race. It's a heist. It's not about how fast the cars can go.
Well,
we just accept the cars can go fast enough.
That's all fine, but they still... One of the first things we talked about in this entire discussion was how this quarter-mile race lasts 2 minutes and is full of effects and full of all these little dramatizations to try and make it exciting.
That scene, yes. That scene, I think, was just horribly done. I think that scene is out there. But at no point later in the movie do they do that again.
Not the exact same way, but they definitely still treat things like the race or the moments themselves as big deals. Particularly the final climax of trying to beat the train. But which is what I'm getting at. I'm not saying that is what the most important thing in the scene is who wins the race, and that's not necessarily equal to the final race in a movie that's about a competition that they're building up to, right? It's not the exact same.
Yep.
So unprofessional, David.
I'm sorry.
So unprofessional.
I have to fidget with things when you're yelling at me.
I'm not yelling. Calm down. But the point I'm getting at is that they still treat that scene, that race, like we should care about every little detail while they're in the race. Like the little decisions that are being made matter. And fundamentally, it all comes down to, Brian over pushes his car. He presses his button too early, and part of it breaks down. And there's sparks. He loses. He sort of fizzles out before the finish line, and the rest of them all beat him handily, right? And it's all him trying to look cool and try to be a part of the group, and ultimately he wins Dom's trust because he shows up to save his ass when the police are after everyone, and that kind of earns him a little bit of leeway, and that's all fine. But if all that doesn't matter, then the race is just set dressing to everything, which is why emphasizing so much of it on these weird like speedline effects and like try to make it feel like it's this futuristic like voyage,
right?
It just feels like hollow. It feels like this hollow, set dressing to everything.
I agree. I agree that it does feel hollow and does feel like set dressing, but I do think that it was always set dressing. I don't think there was any point in here where they said that, hey, we need to make the results of these race actually matter. We need to make it matter like, oh, the decisions they're making during these races, because they never do. They never give it any sort of real focus outside of potentially that one first race.
But if it's just,
at all,
but that's a valid complaint then, that it is just set dressing.
It is. But that's what I'm saying, is that the entire point of this movie is the interpersonal drama stuff of like who's stealing stuff from these trucks, and then whether or not Brian is going to sell them out in the end, or whether he's considered himself part of the group. The cars is just the thing that makes it different than Point Break. It's just the thing that gets and yes, I understand why that's frustrating because they give it so much emphasis.
Then that's a huge criticism. Then that is,
I think
that is a crippling criticism of the whole movie, because the entire movie tries to revolve around that, and it's not actually that important to what's going on.
But that's where we disagree, is that I don't think it's revolving around it. I think it uses the language of cars to tell the different story of this guy and why he's getting into this scene. They could easily replace all the words in it with surfing. They could replace all the words with skating. They could replace all the words with computer making. But regardless, they went with cars this time. But the core story is about whether or not he feels this yearning to be part of this other group rather than the group that he is already a member of. That is the police against them.
Yes. But a good script would still make all of this still matter and thematically relevant to what the story's actually telling.
When did I ever say this was a good script?
But it's still, my critique's still all there then. My critique's all valid.
Yeah, I'm not saying your critiques aren't valid. They're not. If you think that they overdo the car stuff to the point where it becomes a central focal point, then yeah, it is an issue, that it is something that doesn't matter. I don't think they hit that point. I think that the central focal point is still on the interpersonal stuff and whether or not Brian will make this decision. I think that the cars are just set dressing on top of it, but it's not the focal point. You think that the cars are the focal point, and that's fine. And that explains why you have your criticisms. I think that they gave just enough time to the cars where obviously it's going to pull in all the people who are interested in the cars But in the end, the focal point of the story, as much as I hate to say this, is the family aspect.
I think fundamentally here we're saying the same thing. You're just framing it in a slightly different way, and I think what I want to make clear here is the problem with the movie is that what you're saying the focal point is. I agree, it's what the focal point should be, but because it doesn't feel like it's the focal point, as part of it, well, it's not even. That's not why it's a problem. It's a symptom of the problem. The symptom of the problem, which is the central story is poorly written, that the characters are not engaging, that the activity that their lives revolve around doesn't actually really integrate with the themes of the story all that well, and as a result, it's just, as we've been saying, set dressing to be cool, to have all this flashy stuff that the movie's really going to focus on for large portions of its runtime, and fundamentally, and I think you can tell as well that it doesn't integrate as well as like it should, because it's very front loaded. Like, the more the movie goes on, the less it focuses on the cool car stuff, and the more it kind of shifts into just the character drama. And I think that's a sign that it's not as integral to the movie as it should be, because a good script would take and cause that's the thing, you can take any story, any script, and you can take the activity that it revolves around and say, yeah, it's actually not actually that important that it's this specific thing. You know, I brought up Days of Thunder earlier, and you could argue that Days of Thunder is just Top Gun again, but with cars. It's even the same director and the same star, but it's race car driving instead of fighter pilots, and it's all about the relationships, right? But fundamentally, that can be true of almost any story. It can be. But what makes it work when it's done well is that it doesn't just feel tacked on. And everything they set up early on with, in this case, the car racing, should then come back around and be super important to how the climax plays out. It should be super important to what finally pays off. Like, what I'm saying is at the end of this movie, and it kind of is in a sense, because at the end, Paul Walker, or I should say Brian, does like stay toe-to-toe with Dom as they're racing against the train. It should really be about, he should earn his respect, especially since in that first race, right before, when he's betting his pink slip and he says, I'll bet my car, and if I win I get the money and the respect, and they all laugh at him. Yeah. Right? So the end of the movie absolutely should be that he earns his respect. And he kind of does. Like, at the end of the movie, when he hands him the car keys and says, on you go, run away from the cops, I'm not going to take you in, he gets his respect. He looks at him like, oh, you've earned my respect now. That should be emphasized even more. That should be the story of the movie.
And I think that what we're saying is pretty much the same thing. The difference that it's coming down to is, you think once they drop the car stuff, because it's very front loaded, you think that it should have been better integrated and pulled into like the end of the movie. I think once they dropped the car stuff, whatever, I wasn't that into it anyway, and I'm just happy that they dropped it.
Well, that's just another problem then.
Yeah,
the movie's front loaded with all this shit that I don't care about, and they should have just dropped it. They should make you understand it, they should make you care about it, and make it feel essential to what the story ultimately is going to come down to. Not that it's the important part of the story, because the important part of any story is always the characters. It absolutely is, right?
Yeah.
It always should be and always will be. But we have this, I ultimately what we're saying here is that it's a sloppy movie that's concerned more with being a cool action movie that's going to get the teenagers in than it is about actually creating a solid character drama. Which,
I mean, once we finish that first street race, I honestly think that that's the point where they're like, all right, anyone who's going to stick around as far as they have, they're here, we can drop all the car stuff. Like, because after that, anything that they do from that point on is purely just MacGuffin, where it's like, oh, we know that the person doing these heists has these specific tires. Or later on in the movie, we find out this one driver is angry that his engines haven't arrived. Those could be replaced with literally anything. It's right up until this point where hold
on. This isn't entirely true, because all the stuff that the characters are actually talking about outside of what Brian's secretly doing for the police is all still about building up to him actually building up this car and finally proving himself in a race. And it's actually kind of weird that the movie doesn't put more emphasis on that. In fact, what would probably make, because it's actually at this race wars where he's there to win a race. It's at the end of that sort of event where Dom and the rest go off to do their last heist, and he kind of, it's that crescendo moment where he admits to Mia that he's a cop and that he's going to try and help them because they're going to get themselves killed or whatever.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of weird to me and kind of a blunder on the script that he doesn't actually win their, like, Dom's respect, at least to a point, you know, and like not his total respect because he doesn't know all the truth yet, but it's kind of weird that on a pure race level he doesn't win his respect by proving himself that he can win. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, do we even see Brian race at the race wars?
No, and that is one thing I wanted to bring up though, is that once this race war scene hit, I think this is where the entire script fell apart. Because no scene really does anything to lead into the next bit. It's just
that's fair.
A collection of scenes to get us to the end. And no logical, like, why did, they did the race war thing. They're out on this desert. Jesse loses his car because that, again, like you said, not set up at all. And then all of a sudden, Dom has to go pull this heist. It's not set up anywhere. We don't see them getting a call or anything about this truck leaving. It just all of a sudden leave to do this heist. We see the whole heist scene play out. It's a whole thing. And then all of a sudden we're at the climax of the movie where Jesse comes back and it's Brian versus Dom versus these two Chinese bikers that are coming after them. It's a collection of scenes from the race wars to the end, and none of it really connects. And that's where I felt the biggest disconnect from the movie.
Yeah, we'll get to all those things individually, but I'm just on the subject of, like, the central arc of the movie. Surely, right before Dom's going to get the heartbreaking news, which happens at the end of the heist, where Brian ends up having to come and kind of help save them, that he's a cop and that he's betrayed him and he's been lying to him. Surely, script writing 101, right before that is when Dom should be at his, like, happiest with Brian, and that would make sense to me that this build up, because the whole idea is that Brian should care about the fact that he has to prove himself in this race, and part of the plot should maybe be that he does care about the race. It's not just that he's been undercover, that he actually cares about winning a race at the race wars and proving himself, because earlier on in the movie when he said he wanted the respect, the truth is that he actually did want the respect. It wasn't just a lie. It wasn't just, you know, him being undercover and spouting something that would make sense to them.
Right. Okay, let me throw out a few posits then. So step one, he does want the respect. I agree with that 100%. That is what he's doing this entire thing for. It's kind of weird with how they intersperse with Mia in that regard, because he keeps telling Mia, like, oh, this isn't about your brother, but everything in the movie points to it is all about the brother. So following up on that, the thing that they say during this first street race is even if he won the race, that wouldn't guarantee him the respect. So I don't think that the respect is tied to winning a race at any given point. Even if he beats Dom, it has nothing to do with the respect. I think that him going out and theoretically risking his life to save Vince during the set piece of this movie, there is a moment where Dom comes up. He sees that Vince is, you know, he's bleeding, he's not okay, but his life was saved by Brian. And I think that's the moment. That's the moment where it's like, I can trust you implicitly. But then it immediately crashes down when he has to reveal that he's an undercover cop to save Vince's life. So I feel like the moment is there. It's just not structured in the way that you were looking for.
And it's not effective then. I'm not saying you have to do it the way like, when I give, like, potential things they could do, right? Things that other movies have done or things that would work. I'm not saying that I'm right and that there's no other way that could be right. Like, obviously, writers who are better than I am, that are smarter than I am, who get paid to write, can come up with something more original than what I have said. But they're presenting me with a series of cliches anyway, so I'm fitting them into a narrative that works and makes sense. And to me, the whole idea that, like, Brian's starting to care more about the group and he's trying to protect them and he wants to, like, prove himself should build to something at the end of Act 2, right before everything does come crashing down. So it's weird to me that you even see him race at the race wars. It's almost... I think that's partly why the movie is such an uninteresting, dull film to me, is that there's so many things that it feels like it's supposed to set up and then just kind of lets fizzle out into the background. It does it, like you said, with all the other characters where they're just not part of the climax. It does it with Brian being a racer, where all of a sudden the movie just kind of forgets to give a shit about that, because he doesn't give a shit about it anymore. It's just about going to like stop the heist thing. And it does that with a lot of things throughout the course of the movie. And I don't think that it holds me for any of its emotional beats, partly as a result of that. Not that I care about the characters that much anyway, because I think they're kind of dull characters, but
Yeah.
it would work better just on a surface level if it followed the beats correctly, but it doesn't.
So let me throw this mild rewrite out and see what you think. So during the race war scene, we have Jesse out of the blue for no reason. Just he needs to race because his dad's in jail or something like that.
Well, no, let me say it properly. So he comes out, he's holding a pink slip, and Brian says, "What are you holding there?" And part of this is to show that Brian cares about this group of people, and he cares about Jesse. And Jesse, of course, having ADD, is meant to garner sympathy with the audience as well, right?
Right.
So he's kind of this sympathetic character who needs to be protected by the others, because he's the smart mechanic, but he's not the fighter, he's not the tough one, so on and so on. And all of a sudden in this scene, Brian's like, "But wait, that's your dad's car," and Jesse's like, "Yeah, but it's okay, I'm not going to lose anyway." And right away I'm like, okay, writers, two problems here. One, he's never talked about his dad. In fact, we're going to find out in 10 seconds time later in this conversation that his dad's in jail. And this is his dad's car and whatever. And that Brian's like, "Oh, but he'll kill you when he gets out, so like he'll go back to jail, blah blah blah." I'm like, okay, you have not established that his relationship with his father is a big thing for this character. I don't remember it coming up anywhere in the movie. If it did,
That's why I feel that was the most obvious cut. There was a deleted scene somewhere, because it doesn't make any sense here.
So yeah, it comes out of nowhere that he has this relationship with his father, that this car that he uses is his father's. It just comes out of nowhere. And then problem number two is just the absurdly... If you're going to build up to him making a mistake that gets him in trouble, having him just say it right before, and have a character... Having Brian say, "Are you sure this is a good idea? Because you might lose your dad's car," and then him going, "Don't worry, there's no way I'm going to lose," is the most uninteresting and predictable setup to a scene imaginable, because you're obviously going to lose. You're obviously going to lose, and that's going to propel whatever's going to happen next, right? And it happens to be the head of the Chinese gang that's like a rival group of racers that are kind of introduced throughout the movie, and they're brought up whenever the plot needs them to be relevant, but they're not interesting characters. In fact, to be honest, the second like guy in this group, the one who's not the leader, might have the worst line of dialogue in the whole movie when they're looking at Brian's car earlier on, and he's like, "It's a beautiful machine," and he says it so deadpan, it is laughably bad. But that's what this scene you're talking about is it just brings this up. He quickly races the head of the Tran gang, I think that's what their name is, and Tran gang, whatever their name is, and he loses, and he just drives off in fear because he can't give up the car, and that sets up obviously when the gang comes back at the end for the climax.
Okay, so let me throw out this rewrite here, and you tell me if you think it would be better structured. So obviously Brian's talking this whole time, telling him, "You can't race this guy, don't do it, don't do it." So he does the race, he loses, because obviously he has to lose that race, and then something happens where, you know, Jesse's driving the car back, he doesn't want to give the pink slips, a fight starts to break out, and through whatever methods, Brian ends up saving Jesse's life, or at least from a severe beating. He manages to protect him. At that point, Dom sees that, and that's the thing where he's like, "I trust you now. You've earned my respect because you've shown that you've been able to put family first." He tells him that they're going out on a heist, like immediately afterwards, because they've gotten a call or whatever. So that scene now flows a lot better, because now he wants him in. And obviously Brian has to turn him down because he knows these truckers are now packing shotguns.
Actually,
and that's what turns down that lower.
Let's just take a time out here. I want to talk about one plot detail here that really was irking me.
Okay.
So in the opening scene, when we're seeing this example heist at the start, where this trucker starts throwing punches at like the guy, probably Vincent, who's like grappled into the truck, and all I could think was, like, dude, what? Like, surely at a certain point you just park, you just stop driving, you put up your hands and say, it's not my property, like, I'm getting robbed, right?
Yeah.
This is not worth fighting your life for a bunch of DVD players. And then throughout the movie, every time Brian talks to his, like, superior officer, he keeps bringing up, you know, these truckers are getting really mad that this keeps happening. They're going to start taking matters into their own hands. We don't want vigilante truckers on our hands. And I kept thinking, but you know, we see no evidence that they're actually, like, killing the truckers or that the truckers are being put in harm, other than they're just been told to sort of, you know, hand over your goods kind of thing, right? As far as we know, Dom and his group aren't killing people when they're doing this, and that would be a problem because it'd be hard to, like, empathize with them or sympathize with them at all. So of course he isn't. So at the end, the big climax thing's happening. They're doing this heist, which for some reason there's, like, a clock on it where Dom's like, we have to do this one last heist and then we're free. I'm like, why? Like, nothing in the movie's told us why it's just one last one. There's no, like, amount of money you're trying to pile up. There's no...
$6 million, as we clarified earlier, not enough. But $7 million, that's enough.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe there's $1 million worth of merch in the back of this truck when it's just electronics, but whatever. But yeah, this trucker is, like, all of a sudden just, like, firing shotgun blasts, and all of a sudden he's the villain in the scene because he's firing shotgun blasts at this group of characters that we know, and now it's about saving these characters from the trucker with the shotgun. And all I can, like, who, like... This is such an extreme measure to go to, where they've turned the trucker in this scene into the shark in Jaws, who is just bloodthirsty and is going to just kill them no matter what, and it will not stop the truck. He will not break out a cell phone and call for help and call the police. He's just going to kill. And don't get me wrong, I buy that there's some nuts out there who would be like, yeah, I want to show how much of a man I am to, like, these guys try to rob me.
Oh, yeah.
I buy that those types of people exist. But the idea that it's set up at the start that they always want to fight, that there's no truckers who are just like, all right, you're robbing me, fine, you know what, it's insured, you know, I'm not going to be penalized for this, so just go on. Like,
that's the one thing I feel like could be changed, is that obviously they're driving around in little Honda Civics. There's no way they're going to be able to take the contents of the truck themselves without just taking the whole truck. Which makes me think that, you know, they've got one of their drivers. Vince probably is going to drive this whole truck and basically kick the actual driver out. And while I do think that they're insured on all of the property in the back of it, I think that the truck drivers do actually sometimes own the, like, cabs, like the front themselves. Like, those are their vehicles. Right. So I think that might be something they could have revealed a bit more. The movie
never even remotely suggests this or goes into it, though.
Not at all.
Because it didn't even occur to me that they were also stealing the truck, because they never show that.
Yeah, no, they never show what actually happens with the freight itself. It's just they somehow steal it.
I mean, that makes sense what you're saying to me, but they never, ever even suggest that at one point in the movie.
Yep.
Honestly, the entire thing that they do, this heist that they actually seem to keep doing, right? I think it's just a poor idea. I know that they have to do something involving cars, because that's their whole gimmick, is that they're good with cars and they use their cars in some sort of heist. But this thing they're going back to just feels so poorly thought out and thin that you know, like everything we're saying here, one more job and that's enough to, like, sort of set us up for life. And I'm just like, okay, what is this, like, amount that you consider for presumably 5 people who are in the crew who are doing these jobs are splitting this money, maybe not evenly, but they're splitting this money 5 ways.
They're going to be really pissed off 20 years later when inflation spikes and they're like, okay, we gotta steal something from a space station now. Maybe that's the whole reason they keep on doing heists now.
Yeah, nothing about this makes that much sense to me.
No.
So, yeah, it's all of it's just really poor. I think. The whole idea is just a bit shit.
Yeah, no, it is. That's the thing, is that none of the stuff, none of the action pieces, none of the cars, none of the set pieces make any real sense if you just slow down and think about it for any measure of time. It all comes down and hinges on the inter-character stuff of how they deal with each other, how they trust each other and stuff like that. And if you're not a fan of that, then yeah, the whole movie's just going to fail because there's nothing else there.
To make it clear, though, I'm a fan of it in theory. I'm not a fan of it in the movie because I think the movie's really poorly written and the characters are poorly written.
That's what I'm saying, is that these characters don't work for you, and therefore this whole movie doesn't work for you. I think that there's a little bit there, more so in Vin Diesel for me than Paul Walker.
Oh, he's definitely the more interesting character, and they try a little bit to like. I mean, part of it's undercooked. They try and do this thing where he might be a really violent guy that we should be scared of whole movie. Mm-hmm. And there's even a moment when Paul or Brian on the phone, it says he's a cop, and Vin Diesel hears it, and he's sort of like, it looks like he's ready. Oh, is he angry? Is he going to like snap? And like, and the whole thing in the backstory that the sergeant keeps bringing up is that he went to prison for 2 years for beating a guy almost to death with a wrench. Right? He's a violent dude. And eventually there's a scene where Vin Diesel, or I should say Dom, opens up to Brian about his past, and he's like, you know, my dad, he died on a racetrack, and the guy who ran into him, or whatever the exact detail was, like, the next day I just lost control and I started hitting him with a wrench, and, you know, I didn't mean to keep hitting him, but I just kept hitting him. And he tells it, and you're not sympathetic for him, but you're empathetic with, okay, this guy just killed his dad. He was in a fit of rage.
Yeah.
He clearly is not proud of that he did this. He talks about this guy still alive, and he has to take a bus to work. He can't drive himself anymore. You know, it doesn't go into it in detail, but the implication being that, you know, this guy's life is fundamentally altered because of the injuries that he sustained. And it wasn't something that he didn't intentionally try to kill his dad. It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you're giving me this backstory of this character that could be interesting. That, you know, that this guy is sympathetic. But I think the problem is that the actual heist themselves, there's never a reason where I'm like, oh, like, they need money for a specific reason that I can at least in some way sympathize with. Ultimately, it does kind of feel like they're still just being greedy, and there's nothing to really root for in, like, why they're doing this. Like, another movie might do, like, oh, like, you know, a typical thing is, like, someone has cancer or something, and they can't afford the medical expenses, so...
I mean, I think it's simpler than that. All they need to do was throw out a single line saying, my dad wanted to move us all down to Mexico.
Or even just
and
saying...
we're working towards that, and that's all it would need to be.
The problem is, though, is that if they say, oh, we're struggling to pay bills, and this is just about setting us up for life, and part of the problem is that, you know, the system or whatever, any excuse you give me for why they need money and why we should be at least a little sympathetic to their needs, even if what they're doing is wrong, we could at least understand, okay, they're pushed to the brink and they're forced into this, is that they're spending so much money, like, souping up these cars that there's no way I'm ever going to just go, yeah, but maybe if they just stop putting all this money in, like, I'm not even saying don't have a car, I'm just saying stop putting thousands of, like, at one point they say, oh, we need to fix this car, but it'll cost 15 grand, put it in my tab at the auto shop. I'm like, I'm not sympathetic to your needs for money because you're clearly throwing around a lot of it just fixing up cars.
I think that's the biggest thing, though, is that the heist itself and illegal street racing don't square together in any way, because the whole thing of illegal street racing is, let's make these cars as fast as humanly possible for just a short burst. That's all it needs to do, is just be fast for a quarter mile. That's it. Whereas a heist, like, the car just needs to go as fast as a semi-truck, which, spoiler alert, is 60 miles an hour. That's not that fast.
No. And at that point, it's more about driving skill, but as we've already pointed out, the races don't, you know, I mean, okay, there's a little bit of skill in the gears and all that, but it's not the same as, like, driving around and underneath and, like, all the stuff that they're doing with the truck, right? It's very different at that point.
Now, I mean, they do specifically show that every time these people drive on residential streets, not during the races, but just in general, they are skilled drivers. They are able to take these turns, and they know exactly how their car is going to move. They're skilled drivers no matter what. But it has nothing to do with the illegal street racing aspect.
Which is part of why a lot of what the movie emphasizes feels like it's emphasizing the wrong things. And especially thinking about it just ahead to the rest of the franchise. When they're doing insane stuff, doing heists, it's like, it's all, you know, they're going fast, but it's all gimmicky stuff going fast. It's, you know, it's going fast carrying a vault. It's going fast and dodging missiles. It's all the more stuff that it doesn't exactly go with the just driving around a truck, but it feels like an extension of that rather than an extension of the street racing, which is just go fast for 30 seconds, if that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm trying to think of what major crime they could be pulling that would just be go fast for a long enough time, but I can't think of anything that would be...
Honestly, again, this goes back to the street racing part feels like it doesn't even need to be in the movie. Like, the street racing part is the part that feels tacked on.
That's if they were to have all these people be major motorheads and, like, you know, big into cars, but not into street racing, I think that's a completely reasonable way to rewrite the movie. I don't think there's any need for them to be into street racing.
That's the thing. everyone, we've compared this to Point Break, and then people bring up it's a remake of Point Break with cars instead of surfing. They don't rob banks with their surfboards in Point Break. It's a separate thing that they just do because they love it, and it's like something that means something a lot to them. If in this movie it was like, okay, obviously the skill set can lend over to the heist, and that's fine, but if instead of street racing it was just, oh, like they like fixing up cars, and there's a couple of scenes where, Dom goes out and just drives around a racetrack because he likes to do it. He loves to drive fast, and he loves to, and maybe that's where Brian could be going to try to start being undercover, is that he goes out there and races at the same time, and that's how they meet. Maybe like that's how you could start it. It would feel maybe a lot more natural than there's this big insane street racing like world that he's a part of, and I don't know, like there's so many things that it feels like there's something to me, maybe it's just one of the most egregious things to me in a movie, but when a movie's trying to be really cool and to appeal to teenagers, it tends to be when I'm the most annoyed at a movie and when it feels the most hollow to me. And it's fine if it's backed up with good writing and a good script and all the rest of it, but I don't think this is. I think the direction here feels hollow, the writing here feels hollow, and yeah, I mean, what else is there? We could go through. I mean, there's some scenes we've skipped over, like when the Asian gang's torturing the one dude with the oil in his mouth or whatever, but it all feels a bit redundant at this point.
There's after the scene where Brian saves Dom from the cops, he's invited into a party.
Yes.
And that's the first time that we really get the moment where Dom's like, nah, this guy's cool because all the rest of you bailed on me. He's the only one who stuck around and saved me from the cops.
Yes. And Dom does not want to go back to prison. He says he'd die before he goes back. That's something that's
multiple
established.
times, yep.
Did you like how that one racer in the street race was playing a little portable PlayStation in his car?
Define the word like. I was amused by it. I was like, oh, that's quirky, but then nothing happened with it.
Yeah, I think around this, I don't know if it was maybe a little too early for this, but they did release that mini PS1 that did have like a portable like laptop screen with it.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that's what this was, but I don't think it's far off that, so it's not completely ridiculous that he could be doing that. But it's just this idea that he's about to be in a street race and he's literally just killing time at the starting line by playing Gran Turismo.
I was kind of waiting for it to be one of those like speed racer things where it's this particular driver's hooked up his whole system to be played through the DualShock controller. They just didn't do it.
That would be kind of like a level of dumb that I might get on board with, because at least then it'd have some personality. Whereas I feel like
that's just wacky racers at that point.
Yeah, that seems more fun to me though, because at least that's full of character, Whereas this movie's entire character is like, oh, all these characters think cars is cool. Aren't cars cool?
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Then we get the scene where Brian asks out Mia. She says, no, I don't date my brother's friends.
And Vincent acts like a dick, and then she immediately goes, Vincent, what's that place you want to take me to? And he describes where he wants to go. And then she turns around and goes, hey, Brian, do you want to take me there?
Yeah, that is exactly what I wrote was, Vince is a dick, Mia says yes. So then we get this part in the movie where Hector comes in and he says, hey, I have 3 Honda Civics and I need to be really tricked out. And immediately Brian's like, okay, so you're our guy, right? Like that has to be what it is.
What a red herring. Exactly the same 3 of a vehicle that is being used in the heist by someone else in the illegal street racing scene, but not the people who are actually doing the heists.
I mean, I'd be okay with it if this were the only red herring, but the fact that it's immediately followed up by a second red herring is what gets me.
Yeah, the Asian gang, they go snooping around.
Well, you skip over a scene where Brian goes and snoops on Hector, finds out they're using the wrong tires, but for some reason Vince and Dom are just there, and he has to come up with a whole thing as to why he's not a cop.
I'll be honest, I wanted to skip over it, but yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But, well, it just strikes me because, like, that's the part where I feel like Paul Walker's acting, or lack thereof, really shines, in that he's not... I don't. If I'm watching this guy give the story of I was just investigating because I want to beat him in a race because I owe you a car, I'd be like, no, you're a cop, dude. I don't believe a word you're
It
saying.
was so tedious to watch. Honestly, I think Vincent immediately yelling "cop" at him like multiple times. Like, he's a cop, man. He's a cop. Of course, he's a cop. Just like, I feel you're making it hard for me to believe that Dom's not at least suspecting that he's a cop because Vincent keeps yelling it. Even though he has been a dick, and even though he's just being like maybe jumping to conclusions. Yeah. So all that stuff plays out. It's not, but anyway, yeah. The whole thing is the Asian gang have like a lot of DVD players in like their warehouse or whatever, and it turns out later after they arrest the Asian gang, like their leaders, that they were all purchased legitimately. And I was like, well, why did they have, like, did they own an electronics store and like Brian didn't do his homework and like, oh, this is just all stock. They literally have stock.
I mean, I will give the movie a little bit of credit where he thinks it's the Asian gang and he puts that forward to his boss. And he's like, all I have, though, is circumstantial evidence. Let me get some real hard evidence. And they're like, no, we're going in anyway. And then it turns out that, yeah, it was just circumstantial. It wasn't actually them. So I
Fair.
at least appreciate the fact that they made Brian be like, I'm not positive on this, but I think it's worth knowing.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Anyway, so they're building up. Brian's kind of pushed to try and get an answer. And this is a lot of the other things that's really kind of dropped, is that it is weird that we never see his superior or the FBI guy who keeps barking orders at him again.
Yeah.
Because he makes a sort of push with Dom. It's after that race with the Porsche guy or the Ferrari guy.
Ferrari, yeah.
Right? And he's like, hey, whatever you're in, because you're definitely not affording all these car upgrades with just your little diner place. So, like, what are you into? I went in. So he's sort of pushing past the point of comfort where he's trying to, like, get into it. And Dom says, hey, let's see how you do at Race Wars, and we'll talk after that. Which is another reason why it's weird that they just kind of leave Race Wars and nothing ever comes of it, you know? And I'm not so sure why Jesse driving off and not being there with them is what prompts them going to do another heist.
That's the thing, is I don't, because if you remember the way that they got their information on the first heist, some guy at the shipping yard called to them. Like, he called over a cell phone saying, here's what's written on the side of the truck.
Yeah, maybe they get a call.
I think they got a call and we just didn't see it, which is, just poor filming. We should have seen that call come in so that we understood why they were leaving. But,
yeah, that's fair.
Also smattered throughout here is that Brian and Mia go on their date, and it apparently ends very well.
Yes.
I just bring it up because their relationship in the end of the movie ends up being a nothing. It's just a completely dropped thread, and it bothers me.
She disappears to go to the hospital with the others who are hurt.
Right.
And, you know.
But, like, they gave so much focus to it, and they couldn't even say a thing of, like, did Brian try reaching out to her again after everything that happened, where she revealed that he was a cop? It's just, she walks away tearfully, and then we just assume they never spoke again, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, honestly, like, everything, the way it just drops everything once we get to Race Wars that it was kind of building to is really weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, so after the heist, which, you know, we should talk about that a little bit. You know, there's a lot of Vincent, like, dangling from the truck and his arms getting caught up in the cable. There's a lot of them trying to get him down but failing. The driver's shooting shotgun blasts at everyone constantly. Eventually, after Michelle Rodriguez's character Letty, I don't think we've ever used her character's name once yet, but Letty, gets driven off the road and is a little bit injured. The guy, Leon, the one member of the group that we've barely mentioned because he has no character, he's just there a lot. He drives back to help her. That's when Brian comes swooping in with Mia in the passenger seat, and he's going to, like, earn some love by, like, helping out Vincent, but then immediately admitting that he's a cop to, like, call in the helicopter.
He had to admit he was a cop to Mia in order to get her to work with him, because he was like, look, your brother's driving into a trap. I just so happen to know that these truckers have shotguns now.
Which
so
also, that even doesn't even feel like that specific of, like, a... Okay, he knows that the truckers might be starting to fight back, but it's not like he knows this one especially is going to be a problem.
Yeah, can you imagine if they did all this and the heist went off without a hitch?
I know. And then they drive up after, it's all right, and Mia's like, oh yeah, he said he was a cop. And everyone's like, what?
Well, I think that would probably play out differently if that's he would drive up afterwards. He'd be like, oh, you guys got the goods. Mia, can I come talk to you over here
Yeah,
real quick?
yeah, all that cop stuff I said. I was just playing a little joke.
I just really wanted to be a part of this heist, and I didn't think you were going to tell me unless I like threatened legal action. So
yeah, and that's the other thing. Like when they're leaving to go in the heist, it shows Dom and Mia having like a fight as if she's mad that he's still doing this, and I don't think there's a single hint in the rest of the movie that she is in any way unhappy with something Dom is doing. It's just again, it's completely out of nowhere.
I don't think there's a hint in this movie that she knows anything that Dom does.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like I would not be surprised if there was a scene halfway in this movie where they're having their barbecue and Mia's like, "Wait a minute, you race cars?"
Nah, she's at the street race. And the only reason why I know she's at the street race is because when Brian's making his challenge, it cuts to her sort of smiling like, oh, she's impressed.
Oh, that's right, she was there.
Yeah.
See, it's completely non-important to the story.
Yes. So afterwards, Brian goes to Dom's house. Dom is, getting ready to flee with his souped-up car that he showed off earlier, and Brian's trying to calm him down, but then Jesse drives up, apologizes for doing the race, whatever, and that's when the drive-by happens. The two Asian guys in the motorbikes come up, shoot Jesse, and Dom and Brian both basically go in pursuit to try and get them. And there's some stunts here where they're kind of hitting them, and they eventually hit the cars into the bikes, and that's kind of it. And then Dom wants to try and see if he can do this quarter mile in time for the train crossing.
That's the issue. Is we see Brian watching Dom's car from the bottom of a hill. He hops in his own car, gives chase, but then they just meet up at a stoplight, and Dom's like, I used to drag race here all the time. I'm gonna go for it. And Brian doesn't even say anything. He's just like, respect, I get it. And I guess they decide without words that this is a race to decide whether or not he's taken into custody.
I don't actually think it's a race for that. I think Brian just decides that after. It's just Brian wants to keep up with them so that Dom...
If he was 100% dedicated to not letting Dom get away, he could have very easily, while at the stoplight, just pulled in front of him.
Well, yeah, but that wouldn't prove it, and that wouldn't earn respect, and it wouldn't show Dom that he's making that decision.
Right. No, I understand if you go from the respect angle, this is a thing. But as soon as he pulls up to that stoplight and doesn't immediately arrest Dom, I know for a fact, no matter what the end of the race is, Dom's not being arrested, because that's clearly not what he wants to do. He's more focused on the respect angle.
Yeah, but the movie still plays, it still plays out that way. Yeah.
It still plays it as if it's this thing where he's like, oh, I'm going to take you into custody. Nah, get out of here.
As far as the movie's problems go, this is at the bottom of the list.
That's
for
fair.
me. This is just traditional dramatization to me, because the whole point is it's almost like they're not even thinking about it. It's not until they hear the police sirens coming where it's like, oh shit, yeah, you're a cop and technically you're supposed to arrest me, and then he makes his choice.
I guess the bigger problem I have with this scene is the fact that this one felt the most disjointed. I can appreciate the fact that maybe he got a call from whoever about that truck leaving. I can appreciate the fact that he wants to flee after he finds out that Brian's a cop. I can imagine these scenes explaining those other scenes happened. But between the part where they knock the Chinese bikers off of their bikes to this scene, I don't understand how.
Oh yeah, that's fair. The transition to this is weird.
Yeah.
But this is what their big ending is going to be, and it literally just fades to black after Brian lets him go.
And they let him he wrecks his dad's car because they make it past the train.
That's right.
They barely squeak by. And then Dom's too busy looking over, staring into Brian's eyes. And he doesn't notice a semi-truck pulling out, and so he crashes.
And we get a flip. And this is, unlike the modern movies, this is at a time when there was still a lot of stunts. So this is actually a car stunt, which is, neat, at least.
Fun fact, apparently they did crash this car, and then it showed up in a junkyard 5 years later in Herbie Fully Loaded. Because they weren't just going to get rid of the car, I guess. You got a crash car, you still use it as a prop.
That's fair enough. Yeah, the movie's got it. The studio's got it, in their warehouse somewhere. Why not? Yeah, and then there's a little post-credit scene. I don't know if you...
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I've always been checking.
I know you do. This was before, and this is a common thing, though, so it's kind of surprising it has this little one. It's just him driving. It's just Dom driving in Mexico. And
saying his tagline pretty much for the movie of quarter mile at a time.
yeah, that's all it is. Which is funny because it feels like maybe that's setting up a sequel, but then he's not in the sequel. So, do you know what's so funny about this franchise to me is maybe they just wanted more money than they were offering or whatever. But it is kind of wild that most of the main cast, like Paul Walker's back for the second one. I don't know if anyone else comes back that's prominent, but then the third movie's like set in Japan, and it's like a new main character. And then it's not
Tokyo.
And it's not until the fourth one that, you know, the main four are all back again. And it's funny with how big it's become and how big a franchise and this blockbuster thing that's, you know, $1 billion movie. And it's just so weird to me that for a while the cast were resistant to coming back to it. And then it's like it's just funny in hindsight how they might have been kicking themselves if they stayed away when, like, how big it became. What are you laughing at?
Paul Walker obviously returns for the second film.
Uh-huh.
And you were saying, I don't think anybody else
Oh,
returns.
who goes back?
No, there's one person returning. And it is the FBI agent that I said, hey, wouldn't it be funny if he came back for another? Damn it.
Yeah, I think the other main guy in the second one, though, is another guy who comes back later for the rest of them.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But, so fair enough.
Ludacris is in the second one, so I know he shows up a few times.
Yeah, and I think the main guy in the third one does become like one of the group later on. It's kind of funny how so much of this franchise is and we don't know this yet, obviously, after the first one, but they're going to retcon so many deaths, and they're going to somehow put together a group of characters who are very unrelated in these first several movies into this family unit that's going to be together after that point.
I feel like I want to try to view this through the comic book lens that I have, where it's like, all right, there are like 4 or 5 different comics that were written, completely different characters, and then we need the team up issue, and that's when it'd be like Fast 5 or 6 or whatever.
Oh dear, God, I really hate this movie. You know that?
That's fair. I fully understand where the dislike comes from. I just don't share it.
It's a combination of cliched plot ideas and characters, bad writing, some bad acting, and then it's kind of like teenage fetishization of a subject that is sort of there to like give it a personality. You know, it's like in lieu of actually having a personality, it's fixating on this thing that they really want to say is the coolest thing ever, and maybe part of it's just a taste thing, but I just don't think it's that cool. So the entire movie feels lame to me. It's lame. It's lame.
That's fair.
All these cars are just like, oh my god, you're all just so worried about how small your dicks are that you have to put it all like, oh, this, you know, oh, look at how great my car is and all the horsepower, yeah.
Boy, this is going to be a fun month. This is going to be a real fun season.
But I've got like hatred for years for this one. I don't know if I've got like the same pent up, like, you know, the next few are all new watches for me.
And that's fair, but if you think they're going to do any less fetishization of these cars, you got another thing coming.
But I don't necessarily mind them like fetishizing them a little bit. It's the extent of which it's like a focus.
That's what I'm saying. You think it's going to get less? No, my friend.
Yeah, but I've seen 6, 7, and 8 though, and it's not as bad in those.
Yeah, but that's the point where they decided, oh wait, it's not about cars anymore. It's about heists and space drops.
But the cars are still a big part of that. They're still skilled drivers. That's the point.
Yeah, they're doing the stuff with the cars, but I'm saying that their focus went from the street racing and, hey, let's trick out our cars to, hey, what can we do with these cars?
I'm just saying.
Did you know they could drive? I'm
just saying that I hope they transition a little bit earlier.
Fair enough.
Than I think they are, because I think they transition with the 5th movie. I'm hoping it happens before then.
I doubt it, but we'll see.
I doubt it as well. But, you know, this movie is aggressively 2001. Maybe at least the shooting style and the gimmicky editing and the way they shoot that for Street Race, I'm hoping that's just kind of gone for the second one onwards. I'm hoping it is. Please be gone.
Yeah. I mean, by the time we're done with this season, at least this half of this season, we're going to be all the way in 2011.
Yeah, I know.
So we got to jump ahead here.
Yeah, and, you know, the soundtrack, just one more note on that, is that, you know, it's full of just, like, Marilyn Manson plays at one point. I want to say the new metal band that plays at one point is Static X, but I could be wrong. It might be like a POD song or something.
If I had to describe exactly what the soundtrack is, it's the soundtrack that you can somehow hear when you're parked at a stoplight despite the fact that all your windows are up and you aren't listening to anything. It's like 3 cars away that way, but you can hear it very clearly because somebody's very proud of their speaker system.
Yep. It's a lame piece of shit. David, what are you rating The Fast and the Furious?
I gotta rate it first. I feel like you've got your rating locked down. Okay, if I had to rate the first Fast and Furious, I think that while it is not something I'm interested in, I can at least appreciate where it is coming from in the bedrock of this series. I think that there was a little bit of heart there. I could see them actually trying to make a good movie, even if it didn't work out. The second half, if not the last third of this movie, kind of falls apart on everything it was doing, and as such, it leaves me very unsatisfied. But it was at least fun in some places, so I'm gonna go ahead and lock this down at just a straight solid 5. I think that it's got its issues, but that balances out with what I actually managed to like about it and just comes down to straight down the middle.
Okay. Believe it or not, I'm not actually going that much lower. I'm going to go with a 4. And,
Okay.
you know, because it's not the worst thing ever, but it's full of things that I don't like. It's full of, I think it's a lot of objectively bad things. It's a lot of taste things and subjective things that I don't like as well. But fundamentally, it's this really just soulless movie to me. Like, it feels soulless. And I think there's a version of it that could work that's about this respect between the two characters. But I have to say as well that I'm not so sure that I think it takes a lot for me to like the undercover befriending the criminal story. I don't think I necessarily like that trope all that much anyway. Okay. So the fact that it's doing a really poor job of all of it is just like painful for me to get through. So I'll say 4 out of 10 and leave it at that. Does it make the cut? I mean, it's definitely not making the cut. I'll say that much.
I want to give it like a cutting it close, but if I'm really pressed, I'm willing to come down to the next one of cut from the collection. I am not willing to go cut your losses.
I will agree with cut from the collection. It is not going higher than that.
All right, fair enough.
I'm putting my foot down here, damn it. All right, so I'm actually really curious. I don't know how people in general feel about this movie because I definitely remember like 12-year-olds liking it when it came out, but I'm not sure.
That's the audience.
Yeah, I'm not sure how people who love the modern movies feel about this original, because I know that 5 onwards has a bit of a fan base who like it for a big bit of dumb fun. I don't know how many of that audience like holds the original in any term of, any sense of regard or prestige. I don't think they do, but
the fact that I know, sitting here in 2023, the fact that I know that the spin-off of Hobbs and Shaw exists, where they're fighting like superheroes or whatever, I can't imagine that they even think this is the same series.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, did I piss people off with this review? I don't know if I did.
Oh, beats me.
Like,
we'll find out. We'll find out with all the massive comments section of someone saying, "How dare you? Paul Walker is a national treasure."
I think that's the problem as well. Is that I just don't think this movie's fun. And part of maybe it's because of what the franchise has turned into. But I feel like a movie called The Fast and the Furious, it's an action movie with a guy like Vin Diesel in it. Like, on paper, that feels like it should be a fun movie, but it's taking itself seriously, and it's just not that good. It's not that fun.
I think that it's the same sort of thing, because, we're both into comics. I think it's the same sort of thing of when you look at, like, Golden Age Batman, Silver Age Batman, and then compare it to the modern stuff. It's like the modern stuff is so much more over the top than the guy who goes and gets a few gangsters. But we accept that they're the same character. We accept that they're still the same story being told, more or less. It's just evolved over time to different tastes.
I'll be interested to see how it progresses. So I've not seen 2, 3, 4, 5. So the rest of this season is all new territory for me.
Oh boy.
I'm not looking forward to them, but well, 5 I think will probably be decent entertainment. But
yeah,
2, 3, and 4 I'm not really looking forward to. So we'll see
I
how
mean,
it
if
goes.
you don't like the characters, then potentially 3 has a chance for you. It's brand new characters.
True. That's very true. Paul Walker's still in 2 though, so
Yeah,
stinking up the joint.
take what you can get.
But hey, all right. There you go. That is the show. That ended up in a longer one. 2 hours on the Fast and the Furious. Jesus Christ. Let us know what you think of the Fast and the Furious in the comments below. Are you deluded? Do you think it's good? Chime in.
Do you think it's good, or are you right?
Yes, I'm being a little facetious. If you like it, fair enough. Power to you, but I think it's shit. So let us know in the comments what you think of it. You can support all the content by liking, subscribing, and dinging the bell for notifications. But of course, the main thing is you can financially support us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get a bunch of bonuses for your trouble. Get early access to episodes, get bonus episodes. We don't know what the bonus episode for this one is yet, but it'll go out when this one's went public. The reason why we don't know what it is because it's a vote. One of the things that our patrons get to do at the voting tier is to, of course, vote on an episode. Sometimes they vote on a theme, sometimes they vote on a bonus episode, sometimes they vote on a regular episode. In this case, they're voting for the bonus episode. So it's either Torque, Baker Boys, or a Paul Walker movie called Vehicle 19. We don't know at the time of recording which one it is, but whatever it is, will be up on Patreon when this goes live for the public.
Now that we've done one of these movies, I was leaning towards Vehicle 19 because it's the newer one. But now that I know how Paul Walker acts, I'm kind of not.
Yep, that's fair. So go check out Patreon, plus there's bonuses for the other movie podcast that we have and whatnot, so please do go check it out. But that is us. That is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies and live your life a quarter podcast at a time. You have to when it's this bloody long.